You may have gathered from Archbishop Tutu and Tony Blair, this evening is dedicated to the awarding of the Hilton Humanitarian Prize. We've been very, very fortunate that the Conrad and Hilton Foundation has entered into a partnership with the Global Philanthropy Forum, where they generously allow this extraordinary event to take part during the conference. The prize, as you know, is a $1.5 million prize that goes to a charitable organization or a nonprofit that has made a significant contribution to reducing, alleviating human suffering. I get to introduce for you the woman without whom none of this could happen, and that's Judy Miller. She's vice president of the foundation and director of the Hilton Humanitarian Prize, and she takes the process from start to finish, the whole process of helping to identify and vet the various nominees that are decided upon by an international panel of jurors. So I want to both thank the Hilton Board of Directors, the Hilton Foundation Board of Directors, the Hilton family, and others for this extraordinary honor for all of us to get to participate in this. And thank Judy in particular for her yeoman's work from start to finish. She's had 30 years of experience in international marketing in both the for-profit and the nonprofit sector, but this is where her heart is. So please welcome Judy Miller.
Thank you, Jane. Always a wonderful, warm welcome, and a pleasure to be back here at the Global Philanthropy Forum, a program, another extraordinary program that you're putting on. As Jane mentioned, the Conrad Hilton Foundation started this in 1996. This is our 17th celebration. It seems to have gone so fast. Every year we get at least 200 nominations from around the world, and our jurors have an extraordinarily difficult job trying to pick just one every year. But when you look at the brochure that's on your table and see the organizations that have been honored and received this prize, you will see that they are really among the best of the best. And one thing that is very new in the last several years is that they've formed a collaborative where they are working together out in the field and finding ways to partner with one another. So these very disparate organizations maybe will be making a new path to learn lessons on how we can model a different type of collaboration, maximizing and leveraging their impact. Some of the jurors are with us here tonight, and I'd like them to be recognized for their great contributions. They would stand and be recognized. Catherine Bertini, who is the former executive director of the World Food Program. If we can turn the lights. She also actually received the World Food Prize for her great contributions on stopping hunger around the world. Princess Salima Aga Khan, the International Ambassador for SOS Children's Villages. Jim Galbraith, board member of the Conrad Hilton Foundation, and been on the jury most of the time since the very beginning. Strive Masayiwa, founder and executive chairman of Econet Wireless, and a major philanthropist in his own right. He has numerous programs in Africa that he supports. Eric Hilton, he's a board member of the Conrad Hilton Foundation and son of our founder, Conrad Hilton. Eric has participated in every single jury meeting since the beginning in 1996. He's decided to step down and let another family member take his place, but we want to recognize his wonderful contributions and obviously his expertise in choosing the organizations that we are saluting. He will be replaced by a new member of our jury, Holly Hilton McAuliffe, who will be joining the jury from here on. Amartya Sen and Dr. Gru Brundtland also send their regrets, but their great well wishes to HelpAge. We also have several of our prize laureate representatives here, and if you could just, so that everybody knows that you are the organizations that have received this prize, if you could all stand if you represent one of the 17 now laureate representatives. And of course, without the board of our Conrad Hilton Foundation, this would not be possible. They are the founders, they are the funders of this, of everything that the Hilton Foundation does. So if all of the board members of the Hilton Foundation who are present, if you could stand and be recognized. And now we will be having our program later, and so you enjoy your dinner, and we will back at you later now.
Good evening. If I could please have your attention. My name is Steve Hilton. I'm the president and CEO of the Conrad Hilton Foundation, and I'm very, very, I haven't done anything yet. Boy, you got a friendly crowd here tonight. That's nice. Anyway, it's a pleasure being back here at the GPF, and Jane Wales is a wonderful partner. So, Jane, thank you for being you. So, it's now my great pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Robert Zoellick, the 11th president of the World Bank. He has an enormous and important job. He must be diplomatic and persuasive as he works with 187 member countries, convincing them to work with him to shape a global agenda. He must be a multifaceted leader, inspiring a staff of more than 10,000 working in Washington and 130 countries. He certainly needs to know something about finance. Last year, the World Bank dispersed more than hard to read this. It says $20 billion in loans and grants, a lot of money. Robert Zoellick has proven over the past 5 years that he has all of these required talents. Prior to joining the bank, he served as managing director and chairman of Goldman Sachs Board of International Advisors. The previous 2 years, he was deputy secretary at the U.S. State Department and was the department's chief operating officer. For 4 years, Mr. Zoellick was the U.S. trade representative, taking an activist approach to free trade at the global, regional, and bilateral levels. In short, the man seems to have done it all. But since he has recently announced he will step down after his term is up later this year, I thought we should spend more time on some of his accomplishments at the World Bank. Robert Zoellick took over the reins of the World Bank at a very tumultuous time, but he immediately set out to calm the waters, and a New York Times editorial put it this way: he stabilized it, steered it ably through a global economic crisis, and leaves it financially stronger, more focused, and more inclusive. A tough act to follow, end quote. But most of us in this room tonight aren't dealing with bank panics and bailouts. We're focusing on other kinds of crises: poverty, disease, hunger. And Robert Zoellick was right there with us. In the midst of dealing with the historic economic crisis, he urged his member countries not to forget the poor. Under his leadership, the World Bank provided more than $247 billion to help developing countries boost growth and overcome poverty. He has been praised for his transparency efforts, launching a major effort to open up the bank's massive database to all countries to obtain access to information so developing countries can help drive their own growth out of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce Robert Zoellick.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks. My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thanks to the Hilton Foundation for inviting me to be here with all of you this evening. So with Steve and Richard Blewitt and Judy Miller and Jane Wales and all of you in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. It's a special pleasure for me to be able to join this impressive gathering of philanthropists, humanitarians, and friends in celebrating the presentation of this prestigious award. And I'm especially pleased to be able to congratulate personally the recipient of this year's Hilton Humanitarian Award, HelpAge International. For almost 30 years now, HelpAge has recognized that support for older people is more than a humanitarian issue. It's also a development issue. Aging is part of poverty and economic growth, labor supply and productivity, gender equality, global savings and public spending for pensions, health care, and other social services. Global aging stands out among demographic shifts. More people are living more years around the world. By 2050, 20% of the world's population will be over age 60. The fastest growth in aging is happening in some of today's youngest countries, in Peru and Nigeria, for example, where the number of people over the age of 60 is expected to more than triple by 2050. And in Vietnam, we're almost quadruple by 2050. So what do these numbers mean? They certainly reflect impressive successes in development. People are living longer and healthier lives. At the same time, these demographic trends pose challenges, especially in emerging markets. Across the developing world, countries are growing old before they grow wealthy. China's demographics presents the most dramatic example. By 2030, almost 25% of China's population, that's 350 million people, will be seniors. Yet today, less than a quarter of workers have any form of pension coverage. The world will need to address global aging, so HelpAge will only become more important in years to come. HelpAge is also helping people think freshly about age-friendly health care and the still too rare recognition of the special problems of elderly in humanitarian relief. HelpAge supports the elderly in Darfur by helping provide shelter, literacy programs, and mobile eye care clinics. HelpAge is exploring how solar energy can assist vulnerable people coping with long, cold winters in places like Kyrgyzstan. It's helping to alleviate the impact of HIV and AIDS in one of the poorest areas of Kenya by providing business loans and training to grandparents so that they can secure a sustainable living and support themselves and their families. HelpAge's knowledge and experience is path-breaking. We will all gain from it. So thank you. Global aging offers just one aspect of how our world has changed over the past 60 years, since organizations such as the Hilton Foundation and the World Bank were founded. Both were created in the same year, 1944, when a world war was still raging. Forward-looking individuals were already thinking about how to shape the peace and how to rebuild for the future. That generation, businessmen and entrepreneurs such as Conrad Hilton, and the policymakers and statesmen who came together at Bretton Woods to devise a new international economic system, saw clear connections between economics and security. They had witnessed the failed diplomacy of the 1920s, the global financial breakdown in the 1930s, and the humanitarian horrors of two wars. Hilton promoted his hopes for reconciliation and nonviolence through philanthropy, but also through his entrepreneurialism. His hopes for a better post-war world were reflected in a Hilton corporate motto, world peace through international trade and travel. The delegates at Bretton Woods planned for peace by building a multilateral framework based on the lessons of the failures after World War I. They created international institutions that encompassed monetary and currency issues, trade, investment, and development, and the reconstruction of broken states coming out of conflict. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, what became the cornerstone of the World Bank Group, was a key element of their design. Now, initially, the World Bank helped reconstruct Western Europe. Indeed, the bank's first loan was to France in 1947 for $250 million, which in real terms is still the bank's largest loan to date. But with the Marshall Plan, the bank shifted its emphasis to other parts of the world. Japan became a member in 1952, and the bank broadened its activities, seeking to finance growth and overcome poverty in developing countries. Conrad Hilton participated in rebuilding the post-war world by establishing the Hilton International hotels in Western Europe and the Middle East. These architectural monuments to modernism were little Americas away from home, spaces that realized the new and powerful reach of the United States. The London Hilton in Park Lane, for example, was the first structure in London that rose higher than St. Paul's Cathedral. In that world, developed economies accounted for about 80% of global GDP, with the United States alone accounting for over 40%. Developed economies accounted for 2/3 of global trade. And most of today's developing economies were still colonies. Russia, China, and even India remained largely isolated from the world economy. That was then. What about today? The international economy is now struggling to recover from the greatest blows since the 1930s. Developing economies are compensating for the stumbling industrial world. Over the past 5 years, developing economies have provided 2/3 of global growth. Today, China alone is consuming over half the world's cement, about half the world's iron ore, coal, lead, and steel. Half of the world's pigs are eaten in China, and 1/3 of the world's soybeans and eggs. China is the world's biggest consumer of minerals, such as copper and zinc and nickel. Now, these figures may well decline as China is built, yet India and others will follow. For the decade before the financial crisis, economies in sub-Saharan Africa were growing at about 5% a year. Today, most of the African countries have already recovered and returned to that rate. If those growth rates could be maintained, African GDP would double in about 12 years, generating public revenues for investment in people, productivity, and infrastructure unheard of in previous years, and reducing poverty and creating hope. Africa can become a future pole of world economic growth. Half a century ago, the world looked to industrialized countries for development models. Today, developing countries, even as they remain home to billions of poor people, are looking to one another for ideas, whether it's Mexico's and Brazil's conditional cash transfer systems that provide an innovative safety net, Turkey's reform programs, or India's IT services. Developing countries are increasingly sources of investment and even foreign aid. In 2008, new emerging donors contributed between $12 and $15 billion in development aid. That's equivalent to about 10 to 15% of the amount contributed by traditional developed country donors, and that's likely a conservative estimate. The dynamics of the international economy have shifted radically since 1944. Even the changes in the last few decades, since organizations such as HelpAge began in 1983, have been immense. The past quarter century has seen more people make greater strides to overcome poverty than in all of the world's history. The number of poor in developing countries has been cut in half. So what does all of this mean for the future? It means that we can't keep using the models of yesterday for the world economy of today and tomorrow. The economic and security problems of the 1940s have changed drastically. Yet recall those topics on the agenda at Bretton Woods: currencies and exchange rates, trade and investment, reconstruction of broken states and development, and then reflect on the news that you read today. These issues remain very current, although the context is vastly different. When I came to the World Bank in 2007, many questioned whether the World Bank was even necessary in a world in which private sector capital flows to developing countries had dwarfed public development assistance. But I had a different vantage point, gained from some historical perspective, personal experience, and my sense of the international landscape. Institutions matter. The World Bank was never simply about loans and grants. Its role has been, and remains, to develop market economies in an open international economic system, fostering growth and opportunity and hope, and overcoming poverty within a better political and security order. There's enormous potential for addressing these challenges, with new development partners providing fresh ideas and resources, and new information and technology to help us solve some very old problems. But we need a new model that connects all the global players. We need a modernized multilateralism that is fluid and flexible, in which emerging economies join new networks of countries, international institutions, foundations, civil society organizations, and the private sector. Just as the international economy has changed over the past half-century, the World Bank has also changed. Today, the World Bank Group consists of 4 policy and financing arms. That original International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which provides long-term loans at very attractive rates. The International Development Association, or IDA, which is a special fund of grants and credits for the 79 poorest countries. The International Finance Corporation, IFC, which is our private sector arm. And the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which offers insurance against political risks. To work better within this changed world economy, international institutions and regimes, including the World Bank Group, need to modernize too. Some look at today's multilateral organizations and they see only their weaknesses and their failures. And they advocate abandoning these organizations altogether. I've suggested a different perspective. The world's multilateral bodies offer a very thin but vital connecting tissue that draws together sovereign nations that pursue common interests. The pragmatic approach is to make these institutions, with all their imperfections, work better. So this evening, I'd like to share with you 5 lessons that I've learned at the World Bank Group. First, we need to do development with clients, not to them. Developing economies are the World Bank's clients and partners, not objects of policy. It's an important but essential shift of mindset. Clients have vastly different needs. If the best textbook solution doesn't fit the client's political economy context, then we haven't helped solve the problem. Now, the focus on clients may seem like common sense, but I was struck during the debate over the next president of the World Bank how some academics and economists were repeating the errors of the past. They thought that they knew the 3 or 4 areas to focus on for developing countries. I preferred to listen to our clients. My approach has been to apply the World Bank Group's unique experience in research, combined with innovative finance, to address what our developing clients tell us matters to them. No one size can fit all. Take countries dealing with fragility and conflict. In 1944, the R in IBRD stood for the reconstruction of Europe and Japan. Today, countries such as Afghanistan, Cote d'Ivoire, Haiti, Liberia, and South Sudan need to find ways to combine security and development so they can break the cycles of fragility and violence, poor governance, and poverty. These countries are home to what Paul Collier of Oxford University termed the bottom billion, actually about 1.5 billion people, who can't start climbing the ladder of growth and opportunity and whose problems spill over to harm their neighbors. The World Bank has created a new hub in Nairobi that will help us to become more flexible and faster in supporting these fragile states while building knowledge about what works best. Other countries are the source of vast mineral or energy resources. The key challenge for these lands is good governance, to fight corruption, avoid the Dutch disease of imbalanced growth, and to invest in inclusive and sustainable development. Middle-income countries have a different set of needs. These countries, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, and others, are today's most dynamic emerging economies. And it's hard to imagine any significant problem of the world's economy, environment, or increasingly diplomacy and security, that can be addressed without their involvement. Yet these countries still face enormous development challenges. They're home to some 75% of the people still living under $2 a day. They still need the bank's assistance, but increasingly important to them is the sharing of knowledge and experience, and then to encourage them to assume greater international responsibilities. Our middle-income clients are seeking the World Bank's group in helping understand how to avoid the so-called middle-income trap. In 1960, 101 economies were classified as middle income. But by 2008, only 13 had made it to high income. For example, China and the World Bank recently completed something called the China 2030 Report, which is a joint study of the strategic issues confronting China's development prospects over the next 20 years. The report aims to be a practical guide for China's policymakers, but it offers key insights to other middle-income countries that face many of the same challenges that does China. Now, the World Bank put our problem-solving approach to work when developing countries were hit by the soaring food and fuel prices at the end of 2007. Some World Bank economists, thinking in aggregate terms, said that returns from high commodity prices would allow most countries to offset the danger. Others suggested that the problem would be best handled by humanitarian agencies, not by long-term development institutions. But tens of millions of people had no cushion to soften the blow. Families were going without meals. Farmers couldn't get the inputs they needed. Food riots broke out. It made no sense to speak of the long term unless populations and governments could address their short-term needs. So we addressed critical short-term needs by working with UN agencies to set up a global food crisis response program and to create a rapid financing facility to support farmers. But at the same time, we recognized an opportunity to promote longer-term growth by promoting productivity and production. Today, the bank's investments across agriculture run the whole value chain, from research to property rights, including for female farmers, to seeds, irrigation, fertilizers, storage, and marketing, and always encouraging private sector development. When the food and fuel crises were overtaken by a global financial crisis in 2008, the World Bank mobilized more than $220 billion of financial commitments to support developing countries, dispersing much of it rapidly. Equally important was that we tried to address specific market breakdowns by expanding trade finance, recapitalizing banks in developing countries, purchasing distressed assets. We worked with others to meet specific regional needs, for example, a credit contraction in Central and Eastern Europe, and borrowing backstops to permit expansionary budgets in Southeast Asia. So today, the bank continues to work with all its clients, but also with attention to the fundamental long-term investments to lay the foundations for recovery, especially infrastructure, safety net programs to protect the poor and human capital, and financing for the private sector. Second, the new global economy demands diverse and innovative financing. Every 3 years, the bank needs to replenish its fund for the poorest countries, the IDA. Even now, during a period of financial limitations, the World Bank shareholders, its 187 member countries, decided that the institution's priorities and performance warranted first-rate financial support. So in 2007 and in 2010, we had 2 record-breaking IDA replenishments that raised more than $90 billion. And in 2010, the shareholders also backed our first IBRD capital increase in more than 20 years, which enabled us to meet client needs at a time of crisis and maintain our AAA rating. To make the most effective use of these funds for our clients, we have to be innovative. So, for example, we're helping countries and farmers manage systematic risks through financial innovation to counter weather variability, such as droughts. We established a crisis response window to help low-income countries deal with the impact of natural disasters, such as the 2010 earthquake in Haiti and severe economic shocks. We brought financial innovation to bear on plans to develop medicines, to lower the costs of humanitarian food and supplies, support biodiversity, and create natural disaster insurance. Now, a good example of how we can use innovative financing to produce results through partnering with foundations is the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, a partnership among the bank, the Gates Foundation, and the United Nations Foundation. Through this program, foundations pay off the present value of a country's IDA credits when the country has successfully completed a vaccine distribution program to eliminate portfolio. In essence, this program allows developing countries to mobilize ultimately what becomes grant funding to eradicate portfolio, but only if the money has been deployed to achieve results. To date, the program has provided $147 million to deal with polio eradication in Nigeria and Pakistan, and it hopes to scale up to support areas such as routine immunization and maternal child health. The World Bank Group has also developed novel ways to finance and tackle environmental issues. We were able to raise over $7 billion from governments for new climate investment funds to help countries improve energy efficiency and technology, lower their carbon emissions, and protect against climate change. With these funds, we were able to mobilize over $50 billion worth of projects in 45 developing countries. So as negotiators debate what a green fund may look like, the World Bank has one up and running. Third, the private sector is the main engine for jobs and innovation. Now, the bank's private sector development begins with public policies to strengthen the environment for investment, whether domestic or foreign, including through an educated, skilled, and healthy workforce. The bank's Doing Business report helps countries assess how they compete with others in empowering entrepreneurs, particularly smaller businesses. IFC invests in and also provides technical assistance to companies and financial enterprises that can support developing country businesses and markets. IFC makes its own investments, but is increasingly mobilizing other investors to join in. IFC is also investing in building markets for investment and innovation. For example, IFC is committing about $3 billion through about 180 private equity funds to build markets through which investors can supply long-term risk capital to owners of local companies. And I was especially pleased that in 2010, IFC created a new asset management company that supplements the traditional model of raising money in bond markets and then investing it. The AMC taps sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and other institutional investors and channels their investments to profitable opportunities that have been identified by IFC. This venture opens up an entirely new channel of financial intermediation. The AMC already totals about $4 billion, about $3 billion of which had little previous exposure to Africa and other less recognized emerging markets. Fourth, we need to democratize development. One of the many messages of the crowds that shook the Middle East in 2011 was that global economic freedom must be combined with good governance, citizen voice, and social accountability. These are crucial for economic development. Inclusive and sustainable development depends on shifting from an elite top-down approach to one that empowers individuals and communities. For development institutions, this means investments in civil society and social accountability are as important to development as investments in infrastructure, firms, factories, and farms. The World Bank has been supporting civil society organizations for almost 30 years, but now we're ramping up that engagement. Later this week, I'll be announcing the formation of a new global partnership for social accountability, a dedicated partnership to provide long-term support to civil society groups in developing countries that are working on keeping their governments accountable. Over the next 4 years, the World Bank plans to put in about $20 million of seed money to get the partnership going and to raise what I hope will be a much larger fund. And I hope that this new partnership becomes an integral part of the bank group's work going forward. But democratizing development also means giving people the tools to gather data and to assess the knowledge and information to better understand development issues, along with opportunities to share insights. We're seeing the power of sharing information through two transformative policies that the bank rolled out in 2010 that are making the institution more accessible, transparent, and accountable. Our new access to information policy releases vast numbers of documents, giving the public more information than ever before about the bank's projects, its analytic and advisory activities, and the proceedings of their board. We modeled this on the Freedom of Information programs in India and the United States, and it's the most extensive such policy of any multilateral organization. Our Open Data Initiative makes thousands of data sets freely available to anybody with an internet connection. From a PhD student in Australia to a farmer in Kenya, they can download our data, analyze it, and come up with their own solutions. The bank is also working with communities to map their own social infrastructure, whether it be health clinics, schools, water sources, so villagers can hold officials to account. And the next step is we want to allow people to use handheld devices to let the bank know from any location what's really going on with the projects. Now, this data is already being used in an innovative partnership with the Hewlett Foundation, the African Economic Research Consortium, and the African Development Bank to produce new indicators that measure the quality of health and education services in sub-Saharan Africa. These indicators will be an important tool for governments in monitoring results, as well as for citizens, parents in particular, to challenge poor governance. Democratizing development is the key to modernization. It is not just based on government intentions or experts' theories, but instead a rigorous commitment to results, openness, and accountability. Both donors and recipients are properly insisting on value for their money. My fifth and last point is the need to promote good governance and to combat corruption. Now, the World Bank has a fiduciary duty to ensure that our funds are being used for their intended purposes. It's outrageous to steal from the poor. But our anti-corruption work has to go further than that. Governments need to take ownership if these efforts are going to succeed. They need to be accountable too. The World Bank is investigating corruption and bringing cases against those that commit fraud and theft. We've set up a preventative unit to try to learn from experience, especially in sectors such as roads that are prone to fraud and theft. But we have to do more. We have to set standards, live them, and promote their broader adoption. Now, the bank can help build institutions that prevent corruption, improve transparency, and involve civil society in supporting good governance. The bank can also help governments increasingly at the subnational level to strengthen their financial management, their procurement systems, auditors, and other systems that will promote accountability. But we're still going to have to break through harder obstacles. We put some new tools in place, including an agreement with our counterparts in the regional development banks on cross-debarment of firms and individuals that cheat or steal. We've added new penalties. We added something called the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative, or STAR, that will assist governments in recovering funds that are stolen by people who've looted their country's treasuries. And we've started an International Corruption Hunters Alliance to support the investigators and prosecutors and judges and others who often take on extraordinarily dangerous work. So I hope tonight I've been able to give you an idea of why modernizing multilateralism is important and a little bit of a sense of what it's meant for the World Bank Group. Over time, the World Bank's aim should be to help countries take another step, to move beyond aid. There will always be a need for humanitarian aid, and for some time to come, poor and conflict-riven countries are going to require development assistance. The goal, however, should be to move beyond dependency. Our aim should be to shift from a paradigm of charity to one of mutual economic benefit. So what would such a world look like? It would provide poor countries better access to world markets while allowing them to hedge against fluctuating commodity prices, spiking fuel costs, natural disasters. It would facilitate foreign direct investment, innovative financing, and technological transfer so that developing countries can modernize their industry, agriculture, and services. It would support good governance and openness, transparency, to ensure that governments pay more attention to citizen voice and social accountability, and that private sector initiative is rewarded, basic services delivered, and prosperity broadly shared. It would support multilateral innovation to forge progress, to open trade and investment, access to energy, food security, competition in services, and climate change. It would support innovative partnerships between government, international institutions, the private sector, civil society groups, and foundations, so that these actors could leverage each other's strengths, share experience, and learn from each other and work together to bring better development solutions. It would be a world in which all countries could tap the energies and genius of all young people, the elderly, not least girls and women, an under-realized source of growth everywhere. Now, much of the World Bank's history has been associated with the Third World. That term no longer fits today's reality. After all, with the end of the Cold War and the demise of the Second World, developing countries should at least move up one. But more to the point, developing countries are not just some subsidiary category. They're diverse, they're growing, economically and in influence, they want more voice, and they want to be stewards of their own futures. The Third World is now an outdated concept, but development is not. In fact, lessons of development, just like principles of sound economics, are increasingly applicable to all countries. And that is what modernizing multilateralism should really be all about. Learning from the past, adapting for the present, and creating for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zoellick. I'm sure that every issue you have raised tonight affects virtually every organization in this room. You have especially established the World Bank as a source of information now for transparency that will help the developing world especially. We are now going to ask your indulgence because Mr. Zoellick has you might have imagined, a very busy week with the IMF, planning the spring meetings and the World Bank, and so he wasn't able to stay, so our official photo taking is going to take place. While you can all go back to your dinner, we're going to do our business so that we make sure that HelpAge gets the official photo that we have for every one of our prize laureates. It is now my pleasure to turn the mic back to Mr. Steve Hilton, President of the Conrad Hilton Foundation.
Thank you again, Mr. Zoellick. It was interesting because I think a lot of us in this room, we tend to kind of look at things a little bit closer and hear that perspective, you know, kind of looking from this level. I found it fascinating. Anyway, thank you for hanging in there. I know it's a long evening, but I think it's a good one. So I'm going to begin now the kind of the formal presentation part of of tonight's prize. Those of you who are familiar with the prize and the Hilton Foundation may recall that my grandfather, Conrad Hilton, created the Hilton Foundation some 70 years ago. And it was his personal philanthropy to help the most disadvantaged and vulnerable people throughout the world. Our board created the Hilton Humanitarian Prize in 1996, and I want to acknowledge the single man whose vision, idea it was to create the Hilton Prize, and that's Jim Galbraith. And Jim, if you can please stand, or not. So the Hilton Prize is intended to recognize and advance the work of extraordinary organizations helping to make the world a better place. As I prepared my remarks for tonight, and I was thinking about the work of our prize recipient, I also thought about my grandfather, Conrad Hilton. And what's interesting is that he retired, I think, in 1966, and my dad became the president, and he continued as chairman. And he would go to work every day in his office 6 days a week, and he did that almost up until he passed away at the age of 91. And again, I think it's a reflection of some of the philosophy of HelpAge, which is that, people have a lot of gifts and talents and can continue giving way, way past this kind of ceiling that we used to use of age 65 as retiring. And at this point, we have a short video. And pardon me, I'm just looking over my notes here. Yes, from Michelle Bachelet. Okay, please, the video. Thank you. Well, that video showed how difficult it can be to grow old in many parts of the world and demonstrated how important is the work of HelpAge. It is now my pleasure to call to the stage the CEO of this incredible organization, Richard Blewitt. Richard came to HelpAge International with a wealth of humanitarian experience. He has held senior positions with the British Red Cross Society, Save the Children, and the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Richard's work in disaster relief and development has taken him all over the world. Prior to joining HelpAge, he was Director of Policy with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent in Geneva. But for the past 6 years, Richard Blewitt has led HelpAge International's work throughout the world. And before I hand the mic over to Richard, I know Judy's going to cringe because she hates it when I go off script here. She's already doing it right now. But this reminds me of a story I heard. And this is a story about a fellow who was a criminal. And he was brought to justice and was standing before the judge. And it was a serious crime. And so the judge said, I'm going to sentence you to death. However, because I'm a kind person, you can choose how you wish to die. And so this convicted criminal thought for a few moments and said, well, Your Honor, if it's all the same to you, my choice is to die by old age. So with that, I will turn the mic over to Richard. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Okay, I don't know how to beat that. Youth philanthropists work incredibly hard. Hey, from dating this morning to here we are at 9 o'clock at night. It's very impressive. Okay, so firstly I want to thank all of you who are here tonight, and I want to thank the Conrad Hilton Foundation, Steve Hilton, Judy Miller and their team, and the board of the Conrad Hilton Foundation, and of course the distinguished panel of judges, of jurors. I would also like to acknowledge my global board, represented here by Tilak and by Cindy, who, and by extension, our global network of very rooted affiliates working on our shared mission in 70 countries around the world. Today, of course, is a very exciting day for HelpAge International. In our 30-year history, this is one of our greatest achievements, so thank you. We're both honored and privileged to receive the Conrad Hilton 2012 prize. But this award is not just about us. We accept it on behalf of the aging populations across the developing world who will benefit from this recognition. And the timing is spectacular. In April this year, the World Health Organization created a historic opportunity for us. They dedicated World Health Day 2012 to global aging populations. As Dr. Margaret Chan, the Director General of WHO, said last week in Geneva, when a 100-year-old man finishes a marathon, we must rethink the conventional definitions of what it means to be old. Past stereotypes developed in past centuries no longer hold during our era of longevity. HelpAge was privileged to be there as one of the invitees in Geneva. Also, Klaus Schwab was there from the World Economic Forum. He's 75, and he has no problem running the World Economic Forum. And he made a comment to say that this year, the World Economic Forum has a global risk register, and they've put the mismanagement of global aging in the global risk register of the World Economic Forum. Business understands, and I think the World Economic Forum understands, that aging really does need to be better handled in the future. I see, from our experience in HelpAge, huge policy and program gaps across the world, but in equal measure, there are solutions, and some nation states and civil society actors are making good progress. You know, one of the good things that happened on World Health Day is we had, I was saying to Eric last night, Eric Hilton, we had 20 million people tweeting on older people's health around the world. And that shows the power of social media, because probably there was only about 30 people in the room in Geneva with the UN, but 2 million people were engaging. It's great that Robert Zoellick has been here tonight as the keynote speaker. The World Bank has for many years supported old age, income security and pensions, and they make a real difference for older people and their grandchildren. Girls in South Africa living with their grandmothers who have a citizen's pension are 3 centimeters taller as a result of the grandparents and how the grandparents use the pension. As Robert Zoellick said, many countries are growing old before they grow rich. Developing countries are aging around 4 times faster than we've aged in the United States or in the UK. It's a very, very dramatic story. So many developing countries have both the dual challenge and opportunity of youth bulges, but equally they have aging populations. And they're going to need great policy solutions to address those opportunities and challenges. We need to enable older adults to break out of the models of dependency and disability to one of economic development and social value creation. And this is both economically smart to do, and it's the right thing to do. From an ethical perspective, it is our duty. However, we mustn't flatter ourselves. This is a daunting challenge. Over 3/4 of those over 60 live in countries of extreme poverty with limited resources. Through our work with older people in the developing world, we hear one thing over and over again. They tell us that their greatest asset is their health and their physical strength. Unfortunately, as we know, health and strength are temporary, and as the health begins to fail, it becomes difficult for these older people to continue the physical labor through which they earn their income and their families' living. And it is these same older people who have no access to social security of any kind. Their vulnerability to poverty is extreme, and it's worsened by the crippling cost of medical care, assuming they can access any medical care at all. Older people, however, remain resilient even in pain. 35 million people around the world today have dementia. Every 4 seconds, a new person in the world gets dementia. There will be 70 million people with dementia by 2020. Peter Peel was speaking at a conference on Alzheimer's and dementia about 3 weeks ago in the UK. And he's likened dementia to where we were with HIV/AIDS 20 years ago. Stigma, a lack of diagnosis, a lack of research, a huge complex care challenge, and a huge global challenge, economic challenge. 1% of GDP has been lost from dementia in its current form last year. You know, and if we make that personal, you know, 1 in 3 of us, assuming most of us in this room are going to we're going to live to at least 85. When we're 85, 1 in 3 of us are going to have dementia. Something needs to be done. Investment needs to be made to take on that challenge and find solutions. On a more practical level, one of the challenges we face is, you know, many children are migrating to urban areas and traditional forms of family support are eroding. Many people don't have children to take care of them, or as often happens, older people have children nearby, but their kids simply don't have the resources to support them. Okay, so I've talked about the problem, but as Steve Hilton, who visited our program in Kenya, saw, you know, older people are making huge contributions to family, community, and society. They're heroes. In poorer communities around the world, older people are breadwinners and entrepreneurs. They're playing a vital role in caring for grandchildren, especially in households where parents have died of HIV and AIDS. Older people are householders and farmers. They're volunteers and community servants. They're fighting passionately for the rights of the vulnerable and they're unendingly generous to their children and grandchildren. One of the strange things I find is, we've all got grandmothers, and we all appreciate our grandmothers, but somehow older women don't feature in development. And I think we have to consider why is that and do something about it moving ahead. When I came to HelpAge, I had experience in the humanitarian and development sector, like Steve was saying, but I was completely age blind. Despite all of my work on international development of 17 years, I never did anything to promote a program on aging. In the years since, of course, I've come to understand the need to work across the generations, both in the immediate relief context and in terms of longer-term development. Today, I'm shocked when I see how few resources are allocated to older people compared to other vulnerable groups. They are simply neglected. And as I learn more every day, this gap is not just a matter of moral lapse. It is short-sighted view of the world, and it will lead to financial disaster. Truly, we fail both the ethical and economic obligations when we ignore aging populations. It's incredible. There is no UN agency, obviously, dedicated to age. There's probably 4 people who work in a dedicated way in the whole United Nations on aging, which is a bit mind-blowing. How is it that we have, serious, planned, and effective immunization programs for children around the world, a wonderful achievement of public health in many countries globally, but nothing of the sort for aging adults? Surely our century, where our aging populations will outnumber children, we can make strides here that would align this to the new demographic reality. There are very, very few NGOs helping older people in poor countries. In contrast, there are hundreds of organizations doing great work with children. I find it an awesome responsibility to be the chief executive of almost the only global NGO working on aging and network. We have to find a way to bring others into this cause, and we've got to get the children's agencies to work on the generational questions in a more integrated and effective way. The old age health challenge in developing countries is also daunting. I've talked about dementia before, but non-communicable diseases are growing day by day. The World Health Organization released some data last week. 60 to 80% of people over 60 in India, Ghana, South Africa have hypertension, and only 5% of them are receiving any form of treatment. The healthcare systems are completely inadequate for the issues of the disease of age, and there's very little tension and will to actually change the systems to deal with this. What's more, there remains a very limited understanding about the prevalence of HIV/AIDS among older people, and this is a very dangerous blind spot. Prevalence is growing as more people are surviving and living with the virus, and we're going to have to find solutions to the mix between age and HIV as we move ahead. We did do work a number of years ago with UNICEF to make visible the question of care. Half of the world's AIDS orphans are cared for by their grandparents. That's a remarkable thing. The sad indictment of the world is that we haven't managed to then get resources in the hands of those grandparents, despite the billions of dollars that have been poured into HIV, much of which has done remarkable things in terms of making antiretrovirals available. But the care agenda has been hidden, and my concern now as we flatline the HIV/AIDS budget around the world is that it's going to be even more hidden, and the burden of care is going to grow, and it will grow particularly for older people. When disasters strike, older people are some of the most vulnerable in the world. I mean, having worked for the Red Cross myself for many years, and then we can look at Katrina, we can look at Japan. However, if you go to a developing context, things are even more difficult for older people in crisis. If you go to Gulu today, you will go and find older people living still in Gulu, left behind, even though some people have managed to go home after the conflict in northern Uganda. Why is this? Why are we failing to recognize older people need special treatment in disasters? Why don't we recognize their fragility and their sometimes lack of mobility? And why, do they have to face not being able to queue for relief packages, therefore not receiving proper assistance? We've done research with the UN to highlight that only about 1% of funding goes to older people in crisis contexts, but they make up between 7 and 10% of a population in a crisis. They simply don't get the resources. Okay, that's the depressing news. Now I just want to quickly turn to some good news. I don't want to end with a sense that nothing can be done. A lot is being done and a lot can be done. We can use, Peter Diamond, who is an MIT economist and Nobel Prize winner last year, he's made a concept of the longevity dividend. The countries of tomorrow are going to be the countries that actually value aging and think through the policy agendas that are going to make a difference to actually make aging a positive experience, both economically, socially, and politically. Countries that ignore it are going to be the countries of yesterday. So, that's a big challenge. Then I just want to turn to some practical issues and practical agendas, and these were partly covered by the film. 3 things that older people, prioritize: income security in old age and food security. We can make sure that microcredit and loans are tailored and made available to older people. They are currently not. Even though Mohammed Yunus will say the Grameen Bank gives loans to older people, the actual credit officers of the Grameen Bank on the ground discriminate. They do not give loans to older people in Bangladesh. It's a big challenge. We've got to get tailored products that will really reach the right people. We need to tackle the issue of aging farmers and how can they pass their knowledge to the next generation, and how can we get young people wanting to farm. We need to make sure that older women and men have equal access to economic assets. A lot of older women lose their land rights, and that's another issue that needs to be worked on. And then we need to make sure older people have access to basic pensions. How can we have 70% of the world with no pensions, with no income security in old age? In terms of health, if you go to Sudan, you'll find that there's only one gerontologist in the whole of the country. There's one person who understands the issues of age and disease. That's no good. So we have to train healthcare professionals. We've got to try and get healthcare to remote areas so that older people can have access, proper access. And we can use technology, like has been used, to really make sure older people can actually be able to diagnose their problems so they don't get a stroke. If they get a stroke, they will end up bankrupting their own families. They will become a burden to their families. In disasters, we need to ensure older people are supported to be resilient, counted, and visible, to ensure older people have access to food and water and health services. And then we need to collaborate ourselves with NGOs and other service providers to make sure that we can get age-friendly response. I'm just about to come to the end. However, what matters more than anything, if I've learned anything in my 6 years with HelpAge, is voice, influence, and accountability. Even more, this is the key that gives older people energy for making change. And we see when older people stand up and are vocal, they bring about change. We believe, one of the big solutions are old people's associations, intergenerational self-help groups. We support many of those around the world, and they really deliver for older people in terms of effective responses to home care, income security initiatives, health promotion, and tackling other community challenges. Older people tackle conflict issues at the community level. They tackle many issues if you empower them to do that. So there's many, many opportunities that need to be taken, but somehow we're going to need a new global partnership on aging if we're going to get the momentum and the scale necessary. The Hilton Award is a major opportunity for HelpAge and for aging populations around the world. We believe that the prize will help us shine a much brighter light. Whenever I go and speak to people about aging, I always worry the light goes on, and then when I leave their office, the light goes off. I really hope the light doesn't go off tonight for some of you in this room, because the key challenge is to really think about, well, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for you personally? What does it mean for the institutions that you represent? This is a tremendous honor, this award that we've won, and now it's the job of HelpAge to fulfill the trust that the Hilton Foundation has invested in us. We recognize that the aging challenge calls for the broadest possible response, and we want to work collaboratively to form innovative partnerships with like-minded partners, with NGOs such as the Hilton Award laureates, with aging experts and advocates here in the US like AARP, and with multilaterals in governments and foundations, and particularly also the world of business. Last night, I was very lucky. Eric, I'm not sure I've kept Eric with me. I was really lucky to sit next to Eric Hilton. Eric Hilton, for me, personifies the partnership approach. Over dinner last night, he really inspired me with his grounded philanthropy, with his constant search for solutions over dinner. He was completely going all over dinner looking for answers and momentum, and his deep life experience that he could draw upon for his philanthropy. A new global social and local contract, a social contract, global and local contract, will be wise if it can harness all ages for a better world. This award is a tribute to the millions of older people throughout the world who have struggled daily with extreme poverty and discrimination. It's through their considerable achievement and passionate selflessness that the world has become a better place for their grandchildren and ours. This day is theirs, this award is theirs, and it's our privilege to accept it on their behalf. Thank you.
Well, we have heard some startling and disturbing statistics tonight, but some statistics that affect all of us. And I'm sure that all of us have been thinking about in our own lives as we are aging ourselves. He called upon the rest of us to take part. I would guess that this is the audience where that will resonate. Before we end this evening, I wanted to have one more celebration. Some of you, maybe many of you have already heard that as we had this wonderful presentation by Mr. Zoellick of the World Bank, that one of our prize laureates is now the new incoming president of the World Bank, Mr. Jim Kim of Partners in Help. So we are very proud of him. We're very proud of Partners in Help. We're proud of all of our prize laureates, even from the time that each of these organizations have received the Hilton Prize. You have seen the amazing progress and the advancements that they are still making. And it's very gratifying and a real tribute to our board jurors that have selected these organizations. Our night is over. We hope you've enjoyed the evening. We've enjoyed having you.